Thanks very much, Angie. I appreciate it. So again, just a quick introduction. My name is Peter de Verteuil. As Angie said, I've had probably about 30 years of experience in sales management, marketing, communications, as well as go-to-market planning and strategy. I worked for a number of years with Future Shop, the consumer electronics retailer, prior to them being acquired by Best Buy. And for about the last 20 years, I've been with in the technology sector, working with Crystal Decisions, Business Objects, and SAP. I've also been with working with New Ventures BC for probably about 6 or 7 years now, as both a judge and mentor in the New Ventures BC competition, and then for the last couple of years, working as an executive in residence on the market validation program. So today we're going to cover a few different things. There's a number of different topics. I'm going to spend most of my time trying to drill into the actual sales process, but I'm going to talk a little bit about just some things to consider about, alignment of your solution with your go-to-market model. I'm going to talk quickly about direct sales versus channels and some ideas for channels. Talk about kind of core sales functions and roles, and then, like I say, drill a little bit into some of the key stages of the sales process and some of the things to think about and be aware of. Also, just have some additional tips and tricks to think about, and then we're going to open up for Q&A towards the end. So if you have any questions, please hold them until the end, and hopefully we'll have time to cover all of your questions. So we'll just jump into it. So a couple things to think about as you're starting to think about your sales and your go-to-market model. One is to really think about whether your product is conducive to a low touch or a high touch sales model. So what I mean by high touch is where you actually have kind of a salesperson directly engaged, and things that would help you decide which one of those makes sense is the complexity of your product, maybe the length of the sales cycle. If there are multiple stakeholders at your target customer, then typically that may then require more of a high touch, sales model, meaning a direct sales model. Whereas if you have a product that the value proposition is very, easy to understand, people can quickly decide, to buy or not to buy, then, that may be something that you can, sell through more of a low touch model, or for instance, a digital sales or internet-based sales strategy. The other thing to think about is as you plan a go-to-market model, is to think about whether it's aligned with the way your market currently operates or the way your customers are used to buying. An example might be if you have a commercial electrical product. Commercial electrical products are typically sold through a well-defined kind of distribution and wholesale network. So if you're asking or trying to get a customer to purchase that type of product, for instance, through a digital strategy, you may not be that well aligned with the way customers are used to buying. Now, you can certainly disrupt a market and change the way customers buy. A good example might be Carvana, who today is selling cars through a digital sales strategy. The problem is if you're going to try to disrupt the way people buy, it typically takes a fair bit of investment and time. So certainly much easier if you can align your go-to-market model with the way your market and your customers are used to buying. The other thing to think about is whether your pricing and packaging supports your go-to-market model. So again, talking about, for instance, a high-touch model, if your product is complex and requires more of a high-touch direct sales model, but your pricing is relatively low, like a $500 or $1,000 average deal size, that's going to be tough to get a salesperson to engage in enough opportunities to be successful. So typically a high touch sales model means a product that's priced maybe in the $5,000, $10,000 to $25,000 or more, and if a product is priced below that, then typically you're going to need a little bit more of a higher efficiency sales model, which might be a digital sales strategy or potentially a partner model. And one thing to think about is as you look at your solution, is whether you if you have kind of multiple types of capabilities and functionality, are you better to sell a core capability and then sell additional features and functionality for incremental dollars, or do you bundle them all in as an all-inclusive platform? And it's just something to think about, as you go forward with your go-to-market strategy. And then the other thing to consider is whether, a partner or a channel model might make sense. So I'm just going to move forward to that. So I'll just talk a little bit about direct sales versus channels. When I talk about direct sales, I'm talking about either typically an inside sales model. Obviously COVID has changed things a little bit. Typically an inside sales model would be in a centralized location. Today, most people are working remotely, but it's essentially a telephone sales model versus what I call a field sales model, where you actually have salespeople out in the field. And oftentimes in that type of situation, you may have people that are specialized in specific, verticals or markets. So for instance, if you are selling into financial services, you might have a field guy, in New York selling it to the large banks, et cetera. Typically, a field sales model is much more expensive, and obviously being more remote, management can be challenging. So one thing to think about no matter what your direct sales model, CRM systems become very important, especially as you're managing remote salespeople, because metrics-based management becomes really important. So you can understand, what your conversion ratio is, how many opportunities a guy is managing, whether deals are getting stalled, et cetera. A lot of those things can be measured through reports in your CRM system. So the more remote you are, the more kind of salespeople you have, then the more important the CRM system becomes. On the channel side of the business, channels can include a lot of different types of partners. So this could be, distribution, wholesalers, even retailers, value-added resellers, which are very common in kind of the business-to-business software business, service providers like systems integrators, as well as OEMs. So this might be a white label type of situation where your product is actually branded with another company's name, and there's others as well. The advantage of a channel model or a partner model is that typically they first may have a fairly large existing customer base that you can sell into, or that they can sell into. So it allows you to quickly expand your market. They also typically will take on the marketing and sales functions, and sometimes even the first line support function. So it's a way to really accelerate kind of your route to market. The downsides are typically they take a fairly big chunk of your margins, oftentimes 25 to 50%. And the other thing is they may not necessarily be that motivated to sell your product. They may have a suite of different products, so they may not be particularly motivated. The one thing that's really important as you talk about either a direct sales or a channel model is, ask yourself whether, do you have a proven business model? Have you been successful in selling your product yourself? And you need to think about the fact that if you have not been successful selling your product, then it's unlikely that a salesperson or a partner will be successful. I often hear new ventures who say, well, all I just need to do is hire a sales guy and then, I can sell my product. But if you haven't been able to prove that business model before hiring salespeople, then you're probably not going to be successful with the salesperson. I'm just going to talk about a couple of the key roles that are involved in sales, and there's really kind of three, and there's a whole bunch of other potential ones, but these are the core ones in my mind, and that's lead generation, lead development, and opportunity management. And when I talk about those, lead generation is really just, actually developing the list of customers you're targeting and the outreach to them. Lead development may be then taking those to the point where they are, ready to engage in an actual, for instance, a demo or a sales opportunity. And then opportunity management is really taking that from the demo right through to the presentation pitch and the close. Typically in the past, sales may have performed all of those roles, but usually today they're more specialized roles. So lead development is typically now driven more by marketing than sales. So you know, there's less kind of cold calling by salespeople than what may have happened in the past. And even lead development is often done by more junior business development or sales development reps. And opportunity management is managed mainly by your sales team. And the reason being is that, you know, professional salespeople are typically more expensive. And so it may just be more efficient to have some of those other roles done by you know, other people. So I'm just going to get now a little bit into the sales process. By the way, there's lots of different sales methodologies out there. Excuse me, and some of them have multiple stages. This one, I'm showing 6. There's some that have 10 stages, etc. But it's typically just variations on the same theme where they may, you know, break out handling objections, for instance, as a separate stage. But these are kind of the core ones in my mind. You know, preparation and planning, which is the things you do kind of really before you even start reaching out to customers, you know, understanding your market. Hopefully that's some of the work you're doing today. You know, how you actually approach your customers, and that may be through cold calling or marketing or whatever. And then the qualification, which is around your customer discovery, the actual presentation and pitch, and then the close, and then you know, things that happen after sale, which might be everything from, you know, setup and delivery to support, etc. For the purposes of this discussion, I'm really going to focus just on qualification, presentation, and close. And so I'm just going to jump right into those right now. So when I talk about qualification, it's really about customer discovery, and it's very closely aligned with the customer validation work that you've hopefully been doing, which is, you know, asking customers and potential customers questions to get an understanding of, you know, how they view your solution. So really, it's a very key part of a sale, and as you start engaging with the customer, it's really important that you start with asking questions and listening. What you want to do is have your individual customer identify their pains, and so why are they, you know, interested in deploying your solution. And now some customers every now and then have problems actually identifying or referencing a specific pain. So sometimes you can use examples of other customers who, you know, who may have had a similar pain. So for instance, if you have a product that's, for instance, an inventory management solution, you might say, well, other customers we dealt with have problems with their kind of days of inventory on hand. They want to lower that. Is that a pain that you're having as well? So if they can't identify the pains, you can use examples to try to get them to, you know, to see if a pain resonates with them. And as they're talking about their pains, as much as possible, have them articulate those in financial terms. So if somebody's saying, yeah, my days of inventory on hand is too high, I want to get it down, it'd be good to understand, well, exactly how much is that costing you? You know, what are the carrying costs? Are you having to discount your inventory because, you know, your inventory is, you're holding inventory for too long? So the more that you can have them articulated in financial terms, the easier it is to then justify a return on investment. And it's important to understand that if you're talking to a customer and they really don't have a pain at all, or they can't admit a pain, you have a very low chance of gaining a sale. So really going through that process and having the customers identify their pain is critical to a sale. The other thing I just want to talk about is, so some people think about more about in terms of gain. So what will the customer gain versus what is the pain they're trying to resolve? And those are obviously two reasons why people make purchases. Obviously for consumer products, it might be more that there's a specific gain that they're thinking about. But it's worth knowing that that typically human behavior is that they try to address pains. Pains are typically are more important and will drive behavior more than, you know, opportunities for gain. Especially in a business-to-business environment, it's really a pain that customers are looking to resolve is usually what drives a sale. The other thing about just asking these questions and understanding the customer's situation, it really helps you personalize the presentation and potentially overcome objections. So again, if you're looking at this example, when I talked about an inventory management solution, you know, customers may not have an issue with days on hand. Maybe their issue is more with theft or theft and shrinkage. So you can, if you understand exactly what their pain is, then you can focus your presentation more on how your solution resolves that. So if their concern is more around how they can reduce shrinkage, and you spend all your time talking about how they can decrease their days on hand, you may have a disconnect there. So the more you understand what their pains are, the more you can, you know, address those in your presentation. And again, the more you understand maybe how they're going to utilize your solution, you can sometimes overcome objections before they come up. So I can't overstress that qualification is really the most critical part of the sales process. Gaining that information about what your customer needs are is critical, yet it's commonly the most often missed part of the sales process. People often just start off by telling the customer about their solution or assuming what the customer's pains are. And like I said, as I mentioned here, telling is not selling. So telling the customer what their problem is, or just telling them about your solution, is really not an effective way to sell. One way to think about what are some of the questions you may want to ask is do what is called a pre-mortem, where you think about a sales opportunity you have and think in advance of what are all, you know, if you lost that sale, what are all the contributing factors that might have caused the loss of that sale. And obviously you can think of a lot of them. It could be competition, it could be pricing, it could be, you know, that you had, there's some specific issue with your solution that didn't meet the customer's needs. So the more you can think about what those potential things are, then you can start building some questions so that you can ask the customer during qualification to understand if any of those things are going to be an issue. What you want to do is filter out any of the issues that might hinder you from getting a sale. So I'm quickly going to move on from there to presentation and pitch. and as I was saying in qualification, oftentimes what happens, people are more comfortable with talking about their solution, so they immediately default to it. And this is oftentimes a problem, especially with technical founders who may not be comfortable with sales, yet they're very comfortable with their technology solution. So they just automatically, as soon as they have a sales opportunity, they'll just start immediately jumping in and telling the customer about their solution. Excuse me. And this really isn't the best way to go. As I said, you really need to ask questions, understand the customer's pain, and then talk about how your solution helps resolve that. There's a common term in the software industry called showing up and throwing up, and that's typically what we call it when people just immediately show up and start telling people about their solution. It's very good, especially if you have and by the way, sometimes your qualification might take place in a separate call or prior to a presentation. When that happens, especially if you have new players that you're presenting to, maybe some additional stakeholders, it's good to recap what you learned in qualification. So if you had a discussion and somebody had told you about some specific pains, recap those as you're going through your pitch, and just, you know, confirm that your understanding is correct. If there's new players in the room, they may add additional pains, or they may agree or disagree with what you've learned. So it's always good to recap it, especially, like I say, if there's new stakeholders involved. As you're going through your solution, you know, it's important to focus on benefits and not features. So, you know, in software, we always used to talk about, don't talk about feeds and speeds. You know, if you need to talk about what it means to the customer, what are the actual tangible benefits they're going to get, not a specific feature. And like I say, as much as possible, if you've done your qualification correctly, you can then customize your pitch to the specific pains. So using that example I mentioned, If a customer has a pain around inventory of days on hand, you want to spend more time talking about how your solution does that. If their pain is more around shrinkage or how they connect with their suppliers or whatever, you want to focus more on those specific pains. You can certainly talk about the other features, but as much as possible, focus on the specific pains that this customer is experiencing. It's also possible to present yourself out of a deal, and I've seen this happen before, where people will talk about a customer's pain. It'll resonate with the customer, and then they continue to talk about all their other features and spend 30 minutes talking about a whole bunch of other capabilities that their product has. The problem with that is sometimes you give the impression that your product is more complex than it needs to be. And so the customer who initially might think the product might be right for them might start second thinking that decision. And the other thing is they may get a feeling that they're paying for a lot of features that they don't need or want. So once you feel you've addressed the customer needs, it's certainly good to go over other features at a high level, but focus specifically on what their needs are. And like I say, as much as possible, talk about return on investment. So if you've got your customer pains, especially in financial terms, then you can talk about how your solution is actually going to provide a return to them. And especially again for business to business solutions, economic buyers are really looking at things from a perspective of what's the return on my investment. If you do get into a situation where you're being asked about competition, or for whatever reason you're comparing yourself to competition, fine to compare, but don't slag your competition. It just lowers oftentimes the customer's view of yourself. And when you are talking about a competitor, it's always good first to show how you are equal to them. So how you do everything that they do, and then talk about what is the unique value proposition that you bring to the table that your competition doesn't. So you want to make yourself equal and then better. The other thing about as you're going through kind of a pitch and presentation process, it's important wherever possible to identify who within the organization are your potential sponsors. And so when I say sponsor, it means really somebody who's going to be an advocate of your solution for that within that customer. And oftentimes they can help you as kind of a coach to help you get through objections or maybe reach other stakeholders. It's also very important to understand who the detractors are. So in the case of software, that may oftentimes be the IT department, who are people who can say no, but they're not decision makers, but they can sometimes be a roadblock. Because it's important to understand who they are as well. And then again, hopefully in some cases you can utilize a coach or an advocate who can help you get around them, or at least understand what you need to do to get them on board. So the next stage, once you've done your presentation, is hopefully you'll have an opportunity to close. And essentially, a close is asking for the sale. And the easiest way to do that, again, presuming you've done your work and you've asked the customer what their pains are, and you have a good understanding of what they are, and you've shown how your solution addresses them, is to just ask the customer that question. Have we shown how our solution can resolve your pain? So again, if their pain was around days of inventory on hand, have we shown you how our solution can help you reduce your days of inventory on hand? And if yes, then or can we move forward? Or the other way is to have we demonstrated return on investment, how our solution can actually create a return on investment for you. So those are kind of the questions that you want to ask, and it's very important. I mean, oftentimes people are afraid to ask for the sale, but it's a critical part. And again, if for whatever reason you have not either resolved their pain or demonstrated an ROI. You want to know that. So it's important to ask those questions. Like I say, as much as possible with objections, you want to anticipate them in advance and address them before they come up. So in the existence of, oftentimes, for instance, for a software solution, people may be looking for integration with other solutions. So for instance, in the example I was giving around this inventory management solution, one objection might be, well, does it integrate to our existing ERP system or to our point of sale system or whatever? So you need to anticipate that this might be a potential issue in advance and make sure that you, again, in qualification, ask those questions, whether integration is important and what type of solutions are currently running. So you know if you're gonna run into an issue with that as you kind of move forward with the sales process. Typically, objections are a search for more information. And when they come up late, it's usually because you've missed asking the right questions in qualification, or you haven't addressed or anticipated those objections in your presentation. So as much as possible, anticipate what the problems are, and then you can address them in advance. You need to understand that typically the default decision is no, and usually a no is oftentimes an attempt to just defer a decision. Very often people aren't willing to make a decision kind of right then and there. So be prepared to accept a no. And again, the thing to do is to go back and reiterate value. Have you resolved the pains? What's the ROI? But again, just understand that sometimes you're going to get a no, but it doesn't mean that there's no opportunity to close a deal. What I'm showing here, bad news early versus bad news late, and this is really just that if there is a major objection, so let's go back to the discussion around integration. If, for instance, the customer integration is very important to the customer, and they have some archaic system which you may not integrate to, you want to find that out early. You don't want to find that out kind of after a 2-month sales cycle. You're best to understand that at the beginning, of your qualification, so that if it's going to be a showstopper, it early before investing the time, or if it's something that's going to take some time to resolve and address, again, it early. So again, as much as possible, you want to qualify by asking those questions, or understand those objections as early as possible. The other thing to understand is that oftentimes there may be hidden or unstated objections. And oftentimes with a startup, it might just be with the startup themselves, the fact that you're a new company, you're unproven, et cetera. So, be aware that if sometimes people continue to defer decisions, the issue may not be with the specific solution or the pain or your ability to deliver a return on their investments. They may have some concerns about you as an organization. And some of the ways to address that is to first talk about other customers you have so they don't feel that they're the first one, or talk about the experience of the team and the founders. So those are some of the things you can do, but just understand that sometimes it may be hard to pull out some of those objections and understand what those are. As you're negotiating, especially when things come to discounts, so it's very often that as you put forward a proposal, people are going to be asking for you to reduce your price, or can you eliminate your setup fees or whatever. The first thing to do is to say no, and to stress the value that you're delivering and the return investment that the customer is getting. But if there is a situation where where you feel you need to negotiate, that you need to provide a discount, there's a couple of things that I recommend very strongly that you do. One is what I call give to get. So if you're going to, for instance, decide you're going to drop $1,000 in setup fees, or if that's what they're asking for, ask for something in return. And so that might be, for instance, and by the way, there's oftentimes things you can get in return that are of no cost to the customer. So it might be, for instance, that they act as a case study, or that they act as a reference, or that they agree to, to be a quote in a marketing piece. So always, before you give something, ask for something back. And then the other thing is to employ kind of an if-then scenario. So if, for instance, they say, well, will you reduce your setup fees by $1,000 or whatever? My answer to that would be, well, if we can do that, then do we have an agreement to move forward? So never agree to it without a commitment to what that means. Okay, I'm just going to go on to some additional kind of tips and things to think about, and then we'll open it up for questions. So first of all, it's really important, before you even get into qualification, as much as you can, try to understand the customer's vision, mission, values, and priorities. Now, typically, not always, but you can often get those just from the customer's website. So it'll oftentimes give you a sense of really what the customer's kind of key goals are. And the more you know that, how they position themselves in the market can give you an idea of kind of what their core priorities are. For public companies, the letter to the shareholder in the annual report provides really good insight. That typically will tell you exactly what their priorities are. Another important thing is to understand if there are compelling events for the customers. So what I mean is compelling events is specifically time-bound events that are going to help drive a customer's decision. So that might be things like their fiscal year budgeting process. We used to always find in software there's a thing called budget flush. So if people are approaching the end of their fiscal year, they may have additional budget that they actually want to spend. And typically a lot of organizations, or at least teams within organizations, want to use their budget. They don't want to save that budget. So are there a compelling event like that? Could be a big conference that they're attending. It could be that they're, installing some other, software solution. Maybe they're opening a store, or they're going through an acquisition. But as much as possible, if there's some compelling events that are going to help drive decision making, it's useful to know that. The other thing is, when you're providing a pricing quote, it's always good to make it time bound. So you may say, hey, we're going to give you this specific pricing, and it's good till December 31st. And the reason being is first of all, you don't necessarily want, kind of an open, quote that's out there forever. But the other thing is, it can help two things. One is pricing in itself can be a compelling event for a customer. But also it may drive a discussion around timing. So if you say, for instance, I'm going to give you a quote, and this quote is good till December 30th, and if they ask you, well, why December 30th? An answer might be, well, we just don't like to have kind of totally open quotes, but if that timing doesn't work for you, we can be flexible. What's your decision-making time frame? So it allows you to kind of enter into a discussion around, what that time frame is. And that can also drive a bit of a discussion around a sequence of events. And what I mean there is, oftentimes there might be, and again, in this example, for instance, of a software solution, for instance, they may say, well, we need to have our IT team do a review, a security review, or whatever. If there's any kind of specific needs around, that they're putting in the sales cycle, then try to get a specific written agreement as to when those might happen. And again, oftentimes you need to apply some of your own resources. So you have, a good reason to ask that question. But as much as possible, if you can understand, and get agreement to when that might take place, then it gives you an opportunity, first of all, to follow up and to make sure that there's a commitment to engage in that sequence of events. When people are asking for a pilot or a proof of concept, which is definitely a valid way to kind of, drive a larger deal, make sure you're clear on what the proof points are. So when people are saying, I want a proof of concept, okay, great, let's do a proof of concept. Well, what are those proof points? How will you know that a POC has been successful? So just be clear with the customer on what those are and make sure that you're clear. Again, gives you then an opportunity to say, hey, we've proven, you know, A, B, and C. So are we good to move forward? Same with things like if customers are asking for an extended trial period, you know, that again, it gives you an opportunity to have a discussion around time frames. You know, why do you need that? You know, and talk about a sequence of events, as well as employee give to get. So they're asking for something. Well, then, you know, can you get something in return for that? If possible, you may want to consider developing an ROI calculator. This only works for certain solutions, but it's actually a solution where you can actually create a spreadsheet where customers enter their own data. So the amount of inventory, for instance, that they're carrying and their days on hand, et cetera, and how much you can help reduce that, and that it will actually calculate for them their savings. So it doesn't work for all solutions, but it is an interesting way for customers to explore, kind of get engaged with the return on buying your solution. I've had a lot of questions about RFQs, kind of requests for quotes, which are more kind of formal ways that usually large companies, sometimes governments, try to you know, engage with sellers. A couple things to think about is one is whether an RFQ is really right for you at all. And part of the reason why I ask that is typically organizations that make purchases that way are fairly conservative organizations. So if you as a startup are selling more to early stage or early adopters, you know, trying to sell to a very conservative company who's using an RFQ may really not be your best target. So you need to think about, and typically RFQs require a lot of time and resources to complete. So you need to think about, do you want to participate at all? If you do decide you want to participate, as much as possible, try to find out who is, you know, responsible for the RFQ. There's usually somebody within the organization who's responsible for collecting the data, and see if you can engage in a discussion with them. I would just say, hey, we're interested in participating, but we don't feel we have enough context or understand kind of exactly what you're trying to achieve, and see if you can have a conversation to drive some of those qualifying questions as much as possible. You know, that might kind of initiate you know, a better understanding of what their needs are and even what your chances are. I have also seen in some cases people successful in getting specific questions included in an RFQ. So this is typically before, you know, the actual RFQ is issued. But you could, for instance, say if you're talking to a company and they, you know, you understand that they're going to be issuing one, is to let them know, hey, there's been a lot of innovation in this industry, and you know, we'd be happy to kind of help you in formulating your RFQ. So obviously, if you can get a question on an RFQ that you know, pertains to your solution more than others, that's going to be a good position. But again, RFQs are sometimes tough, especially for small companies. So just, you know, think about some of those ideas and think about whether you even want to participate, because they are resource intensive. And then the last thing is it's always good to do a post-mortem on both wins and losses. So so really understand for a win, what drove that win? What was the key thing that was that helped close that deal? Was it your value proposition? Was it some unique feature about your product? Was it a compelling event from the customer? So just really, you know, reflect back on you know, what made that deal successful, so that you can help replicate it with other customers and other deals. And then also look at losses. You know, what is the fundamental thing that why we lost that deal? Was it a specific capability? Was it that the customer didn't have the budget, and what were the questions that we could have asked in advance to understand or get a better understanding of their position earlier, so that we didn't have to invest as much time, or could we have won that deal if we had taken a different approach? Okay, so that's a lot of material I've covered here. I think I'm pretty well done there, so I'm going to open it up for questions. I don't know if anybody has put any into chat or not, but if anybody does have questions,